Now to our main conversation for the day. The budget of restoration, securing peace and rebuilding prosperity has been presented to the joint session of the National Assembly. President Bola Tinubu presented a 49.7 trillion naira budget for 2025 appropriation bill.
Key priority areas: rebuilding Nigeria. Our budgetary allocation underscore this administration's strategic priorities, particularly in advancing a Renew Hope agenda and achieving its developmental objectives. The highlights of the 2025 budget allocations: defense and security, 4.91 trillion naira. Infrastructure, 4.06 trillion naira. Health, 2.48 trillion naira. Education, 3.5 trillion naira.
The budget has its key highlights in defense and security, which is allocated 4.91 trillion naira. Infrastructure allocated 4.06 trillion naira. And health allocated 2.48 trillion naira. Another is education with 3.52 trillion naira. The president also highlighted key economic achievements of his administration over the last 18 months. Primary healthcare was also given unprecedented priority. And as he rounded off his speech, President Tinubu promised to walk the talk while seeking the support of Nigerians to execute policies and programs.
Key priority areas: rebuilding Nigeria. Our budgetary allocation underscore this administration's strategic priorities, particularly in advancing a Renew Hope agenda and achieving its developmental objectives. The time for lamentation is over. The time to act is now. It's a time to support and promote greater investment in private sector. A time for our civil servants to faithfully execute our policies and programs. It is a time for every Nigerian to look hopefully towards a brighter future, because a new day has dawned for us as a nation. As your president, I remain committed and resolute to continue to lead the charge.
Now, Director General and CEO, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Chinyere Almona, joins me via Zoom from Lagos. And here in our Lagos studio is an economist, Saheed Ajadi. Good to have you join us, Dr. Almona, and yes, Mr. Ajadi.
Thank you for having me.
Let me begin with you, Mr. Ajadi. Ambitious but necessary budget to secure our future. That's actually the way the president described this budget of 49.7 trillion naira. Now, what's your reaction to this figure vis-a-vis the 28.78 trillion naira approved for the outgoing year 2024?
Thank you for having me and welcome. Good evening, Nigerians. It's a welcome development, because the reality we are having is that while you think it's 49 trillion naira, it's a little amount of money when it comes to foreign exchange. We're talking about $28 billion. That's a paltry amount for Nigeria. You have South Africa having a budget of $166 billion. So what we have in naira terms might be so big, but at the end of the day, what do we have to do with it? That's the function of the budget. And we have to commend the president, one, because this budget that we're seeing now has a better advantage for education, a little bit of health support and increment in their vote considering what the foreign countries are looking at towards Nigeria and meeting the benchmark of all the Brentwood companies, it means that Nigeria now knows that the reality is that education, health, and agriculture can bring a different change to Nigeria. So I believe that the budget is geared towards positive endings for 2025.
Positive endings, and really that is the expectation. I think Dr. Almona is there already. Dr. Almona, what is your reaction to this budget estimate presented by the president today? You know, looking at some of the indices, we're looking at 2.06 million barrels of oil per day production for the country in the coming year.
So thank you for having me, and good evening to Nigerians out there. So like the earlier speaker said, the economist said, this is an ambitious budget. Is it doable? It is doable. How do I view it? For me, I view this budget with cautious optimism, I would say. Cautious optimism because a lot will be hinged on its implementation. So the figures are good, and the objectives are, you know, he was focused on certain things that were quite critical to Nigeria and Nigeria's development. The budget for health has increased. The budget for security, there was a lot of focus on security, and I do agree that if we are supposed to ensure food security, we must ensure that the farms are safe for farmers. But like I said, it depends on how we then take this from the budget to action. Because I find that usually that's where we lose it, when we are not able to focus on action. For instance, we see the 2024 budget implementation cycle extending to June 2025. And this should be closely watched to avoid, you know, such things happening in the future. So it's really at the point of implementation that things usually fall apart. So for us at the Lagos Chamber, we commend the president for this budget, the budget of restoration. And we are hopeful, but it's cautious because we want implementation to be assured that there will be transparency in that implementation, and all the indices that are noted for 2025 will be followed through.
All right, and looking at some of the other indices, coming to you, Mr. Ajadi, you know, the president did mention that the budget is projecting inflation to decline from the current rate of 34.6% to about 15%.
Yes, it's very possible. The possibility is that if we have a bumper harvest now, prices will crash. Look at...
when you talk about bumper harvest, is that as per agriculture or as per oil?
Bumper harvest, one, for agriculture. The prices of goods and services now hinged on demand and supply. We have people demanding for those goods, and the people selling are increasing the price. Some people are ordering the price. Take, for instance, rice. There's no reason why rice should be at the cost where it is now, because the government borrowed money, CBN borrowed money to rice farmers. They gave it to the millers at a particular cost. Now, what are the indices why rice is at this cost now? It's a fictitious price. It's not real. So if there is bumper harvest and you produce more, the prices will come down. And so that is why the projection of the government now, because they've invested so much in agriculture, they're expecting the results early next year. So there's a possibility that it's going to crash the prices of goods and services and bring the inflation back to 15%. Look at petrol, for instance, now. Why is it coming down? I told you on one of your forums here that petrol will come down. Dangote refinery, if it comes on stream, things will go high. It's economics, demand. It will shoot it up. And because there is no backup, it will go high. But after a while, it will flatten up. Now it has to come down.
But when you talk about coming down, it's quite relative, because by coming down, some Nigerians may want to remind you of when it was 123 naira 50 kobo.
It will come down because the government has shored up supply to the refineries. Take, for instance, Dangote is buying at naira, no more dollars. So there is no much more pressure on the USD. One. Number two, there is increase in production. So it means that there is no pressure to import. And three, the purchasing power of the individuals has dwindled. So if there is no push to buy, it will come down. This is economics. It's pure oil hour, secondary school. Because when you continue to buy, and there's no problem of supply, that means that there's stability in the market. When you want to buy and you don't have access to cash, that means that purchasing power has been reduced. It means that people have to sell, but you cannot buy. When they have a glut in the market, what happens? Look at the tanks in Apapa now. It's filled with AGU. Nobody's buying at their price. It will come down. The PMS price now has reduced from 1,090 in some places to 1,025, 1,050. Before the end of Christmas, it will hit 1,000 most likely. And if the Port Harcourt refinery comes full stream, Kaduna comes full stream, Warri comes full stream, we are good to go. That means that we're going to be buying petrol at 800, 500, like that. So it takes a while. And that's why I said to you that the reforms that are being put in place is not to hurt Nigerians, but in terms of economics, it's going to be hard on the short run. But in the long run, midterm, we are going to be good for it for Nigerians, as long as we have constant supply of most things, especially food.
Let me come to you now, Dr. Almona. The projection for 2025, it's targeting about 34.82 trillion naira in revenue to fund the budget. And government expenditure is projected to be, for debt servicing, we have about 15.81 trillion naira for debt servicing. How do you see that, really?
Okay, so just to add to my voice to this 15% inflation rate, inflation coming down to 15, reducing to 15%. While it sounds like a great thing to happen, I haven't seen sufficient efforts in terms of what needs to happen with the fundamentals to make inflation come down to 15%. I haven't seen, when I look at the manufacturing sector, when I look at all the sectors and the cost of doing business today, it's not indicating that we're going to get a 15% reduction. That's one. If I think about the question you asked about the 34.82 trillion revenue projection, I believe that this just speaks to the need for us to urgently attend to the tax to GDP ratio, because our tax to GDP ratio is one of the lowest globally, and we need to accelerate our tax reforms. The Tax Reform Committee has worked so hard to put the different taxes and how we need to work with it, including expanding the tax net, including minimizing leakages and ensuring transparency. But this has stalled for a while, and there's all these conversations around it. But we must simplify the process of collecting tax. We must digitalize things so that we can increase revenue. I think the tax is a low-hanging fruit that we can actually achieve and increase revenue. But we need to implement those changes, those reforms, and implement them very quickly. Now, the total expenditure, so we still have like a 47.9 trillion expenditure that we're looking at, and that includes 15.81 trillion that you talked about. There is need for kind of a proper allocation of our debt portfolio. We need to prioritize high-impact projects. Thankfully, the President talked about putting a lot of funds on budget on infrastructure development. That's where we need to get to, because if we allow the private sector to continue to develop, to put in place infrastructure for their production, then you're putting the burden of infrastructure which government should bear on the private sector, and that means that their costs will continue to rise. If the cost of production continues to rise, it's very unlikely that inflation is going to come down. Also on this inflation figure, the huge portion of inflation, or inflation figure, is around food inflation. And if we haven't secured the farmland, so Mr. Sahid talked about the investment of CBN to farmers and giving them grants and all of these things. You can give them all the funds they need, you can give them all the equipment they need, but if the farmlands are not secure, then you're not going to achieve the objective of all of these investments. Also, if the road infrastructure isn't assured, that means from farm to the urban areas will still be a problem. If we don't fix power sufficiently, we are not able to preserve produce, and so post-production losses will continue to rise. So these are the things that affect the inflation figure, and I haven't seen sufficient effort in addressing the core issues that affect inflation.
All right. But then, if you look at what the projection is for the coming year, don't you think that government actually seems to be paying attention to this? Because, for instance, defense is gulping a whopping 4.91 trillion naira, and it's closely followed by infrastructure with 4.06 trillion naira. So it does appear that some of these points you have mentioned about security, whether in the farm or in the urban areas, or infrastructure, which should include power, I believe, actually fall under these categories. What do you say?
You're right. The allocation of 4.91 trillion for defense is commendable, and because if you compare that to previous allocations, we have, this is quite putting focus on where we should. But remember that there's a process. It's good to have allocation, budget allocation, but the process of implementation, which is why I said at the beginning that for me, my feeling is cautious optimism. The funding must be complemented also with enhanced intelligence, surveillance, and technology. So these have to go hand in hand. And for a lot of the things that we're seeing, the president was right. When he made the comments in his speech that we have been dealing with corruption and insecurity is a big thing. So you may have the budget figures, and it signals the right objectives. It signals the right focus. It signals the right direction, but implementation remains a problem. And that's where I have seen a challenge in this country and in this government as well.
All right. I know that while you were speaking, Mr. Jadi here, kept, making some signs as though he would really want to say something. Talking about budget performance for the year 2024, the president listed about 14.55 trillion in revenue, that the government was able to meet 75% of the target as at the third quarter of the year. He also spoke about expenditure, 21.6 trillion naira, and that the government was able to hit 85% of its target. Is that a pass mark?
Of course, 85% on any exam is a pass mark. That's why I said to you that by and large, it's positive looking. It's looking positive, enthusiastic. There's enthusiasm by Nigerians, patriotic Nigerians, that it seems as if they are trying to get it right. We've been here for several years. We've seen what the budget performances have been. We've been here for several years. We've seen what they have budgeted for and what they have actually done. I think we need to give them a lot of kudos, because now it means that they are budgeting and they're actually doing what they have budgeted. So for me, I feel that they are getting it right. So the budgeted amount that has reflected the yearnings of Nigerians and where actually, because there's something called a scale of preference in economics. You have to choose where you need most of the resources and where when you have a comparative advantage of what you need to use the resources for. Look at agriculture that she mentioned now. Security is important for agriculture to function very well. We have given resources to farmers. Some of them have produced. Accountability is an issue because there's no monitoring. After giving them the loans, there is no more. The rice pyramids that they left under Buhari's regime was at 15 naira and 15,000. And he insisted that they must not sell it for more than 20,000. Why is rice 90,000, 100,000 now? It is Nigeria's money. CBN gave them the money. So they should be accountable. All the rice farmers and the association, we should know how they've invested it. So if now the government has said, okay, farming is a key thing that will take the inflation down, it means that the military, they've acted very well in this year, and they've reduced insecurity. And they gave us analysis and data of what they have been able to do. We read so many arrests, so many neutralizations, so many checkmates for all the bandits and all of that. So we have to give them kudos. And the government is saying, let us budget more money to achieve the end point of this, eliminating kidnapping and vandalism. And look at vandalism on the transmission grid. 128 towers. If the government was not forthcoming, how would we have known that solution? And they've invested, and it's starting to work. So I think they are listening to what the yearnings are, and they are trying to get us out of major problems that have been there for the past. So for me, I think this budget is focused. As in, when you shoot to target, you want to achieve something. So we should believe that, okay, going forward, this is futuristic. 2.06 million barrels is futuristic. We're at 1.6 to 1.8 now.
I hear you, Mr. Ajadi, and you're sounding actually so confident about this. But in all of this, what matters to Nigerians really is that not just about the figures. We want to be able to live in this reality. We want to be able to head to the market and find prices are going down. Not
I
just
go to the market to monitor prices every day. They tell me, why am I here as a man? That I'm an Alaroro. I said, because we need to know what exactly is happening every day. We need to be able to advise government. I'm not in government, but we need to be able to know what exactly is happening and be able to nib it in the bud.
I'm glad to hear that you go to the market. Let's bring in Dr. Amona. I believe that you also go to the market, Dr. Amona. And still talking about budget performance, the president mentioned that our foreign reserves now stand at $42 billion US dollars, and our current trade surplus stands at 5.8 trillion naira. Going into the new year and with the new projections the president is making, how optimistic are you?
You've asked the question I answered before. I'm cautiously optimistic. Yes, the positions are strong. If their foreign reserve has increased, if you compare it with where we were last year, it is definitely a better figure. In terms of the trade balance as well, that's definitely a stronger position. But we need to stay focused. Mr. Saheed has been saying that, this budget is focused. I completely agree that this budget is focused. However, we need to ensure that the things that we have put in this budget, the things that we have said that we will do, that we will do them. And remember, sometimes we have all this, we have these goals that we want to focus on and achieve, but the common man in the streets, the common man is hungry. Okay, the common man is struggling with the cost of doing business, struggling with the cost of transportation, struggling with the cost of, production, power, all of these things. We need to very quickly, rein in some of these challenges, and that's by tackling the persistent challenges of corruption, of governance reforms. They have to be done. We can't, start and stop. But like we have all said, this project is very ambitious, but we need to ensure that the dynamics must be maintained for it to be actualized.
All right, Dr. Amona, I most sincerely appreciate you for joining us today. Director General, CEO, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you very much, Dr. Chinyere Amona, for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
And of course, also with me in the studio, economist Saheed Ajadi. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us on the program.
Pleasure's mine. Believe in Nigeria and be trustful. Patriotism is the key to success.